Hear that? Welcome to the channel. Today, I'm going to be making some easy gluten-free ciabatta rolls. I'm super excited to share this with you. I found it on the website, the Loopy Whisk. I've done one of her recipes before, came out amazing. It's for her white bread that's gluten-free. These, I think, are going to be just as good. As an added bonus, for those of you that are dairy-free or egg-free, neither of those ingredients are in this recipe either. I'm Jamie with SavorySaver. I share gluten-free recipes, tips, tricks, and resources to make your gluten-free lifestyle easier. So let's get started. Real quick, before we get started on the recipe, I just want to go over a couple things on the recipe and why I like Kat's recipes. For one, her instructions are very well done. I understand everything. If I don't understand something, her blog post usually explains something. So I really like how intricate the directions are. It looks like a lot of directions on the recipes I've done from her, but they're easy to follow. And I just think they're very well done. Even though it looks like a lot, it really isn't, and they're easy to understand. The other thing, she always gives the flour she uses and substitutions if you don't have that gluten-free flour. For instance, the main gluten-free flour in this one is millet flour, but if you don't have that, she says you could also use an equal weight of brown rice flour instead. So I like that she's giving me those options. She does do most of her recipes by weight, so I try to do weight where I can because it saves on dishes and it's more accurate. She also gives the equivalents as volume, so if you do not bake by weight, you can still bake her recipes by volume. So let's get started. You're going to start with 360 grams or about a cup and a half of lukewarm water. That should be between 98 and 105 degrees Fahrenheit. To that, you want to add psyllium husk. I am using husk powder. She typically uses rough or whole psyllium husk, so the weight is a little different. If you're using whole or rough psyllium husk, you're going to use 15 grams or 3 tablespoons. But because I'm using the powder, I'm only using 13 grams, so a little less, but because I'm baking by weight, that's not a problem. I just measured out less. You're gonna add the psyllium husk to the water. We're gonna give it a mix, and it's gonna take about 35 seconds, 45 seconds for it to gel up and hydrate itself. I love that she does this first because it gives it a chance to all mix together, and then it's ready to go. It doesn't have to do it as we're mixing up the dough. Got a couple lumps in here. I'm going to try to work those out and then put it off to the side. All right, it's all whisked up. Let's put it to the side. Kat does say you can do this by hand. I'm going to use the stand mixer because it makes it a little easier on me. I have already put the gluten-free flours into the bowl because I've done them by weight, and it's just easier than you guys having to watch me do it. So to the bowl of the stand mixer, I have 120 grams of millet flour, which is about 3/4 of a cup plus 2 tablespoons. I also have 115 grams or about a cup of tapioca starch, and the final gluten-free flour is 80 grams or about a cup and 2 tablespoons of sorghum flour. So all these are easy to find either in your grocery store or online. I will link below to all of them to make it easier for you. They are Bob's Red Mill. All right, I gave it a quick whisk. You don't have to do it at this point, I just did. Next, let's add some granulated sugar. I've got a tablespoon or 15 grams. I'm adding 8 grams of instant yeast. That would also be 1 packet, or about 1 packet. 1 packet's actually 2 1/4 teaspoons. She actually calls for 2 1/2 teaspoons. And if you're using dry active yeast, you would need to do the recipe different because you would need to activate it in your warm water. And you would also use a different amount. You would use 10 grams instead of the 8. With the instant, I can add it right to the recipe. Let's give it just another whisk. The reason I whisked it one more time is because I'm adding salt. Sometimes salt and yeast don't get along at the beginning stages of the baking process. So I'm now gonna add 1 teaspoon or 6 grams of salt. It's time to add our wet ingredients and get this mixed up. So let me move the stand mixer over. All right, Kind of got a little well there in the center to hold the liquids, so let's add those. Let's add that psyllium husk gel. I know it doesn't look super appetizing, but it's about the color of like cinnamon applesauce. So think of it that way, and that doesn't look so unappealing. I'm also gonna add 2 tablespoons or 25 grams of olive oil. So there's 1 and 2. And a teaspoon and a half of apple cider vinegar. Now I've got my dough hook on. Kat says to knead the dough until it's smooth and all the ingredients are evenly incorporated. Use a rubber spatula to occasionally scrape the sides and the bottom of the bowl to prevent any dry patches. The final dough should be smooth, supple, and fairly soft with no lumps of unmixed flour or psyllium gel. It should also come away from the sides of the mixing bowl. It will be slightly sticky, but you shouldn't need to add any more flour or it will dry the rolls out and make them dense. So I'm gonna start mixing it. I'm gonna mix it for 1 to 2 minutes. I'll look at it, scrape the bowl, see where I'm at, then I'll continue mixing and I'll give you guys a rough estimate of time once we get to the finished point. All right, let's mix it up and I'm gonna start it off slow and then I'll bump it up till probably 4 to 6 on the mixer. All right, guys, this is about 1 minute in. A lot of it is mixed, but the sides are pretty high and it's not really getting to that. So I'm gonna actually scrape it down now. Now I'll mix it for another minute or so. Then I will definitely check the bottom. So we'll look at it in just a minute. So that's about a 2-minute total mix time. And I don't see anything dry, even down at the bottom. Yeah, I'm not seeing any dry ingredients. So that's great. I love how everything is coming together. I really like that about her white bread recipe. I mean, gluten-free, and look, it actually is all together. One cohesive piece of dough. Now I'm going to take this and probably mix it for about 5 minutes and then I'll look at it. I do want it to be smooth and it should be fairly soft like it says, but that's gonna take a little bit of mixing time. So let's mix it for 5 minutes and see where we're at. This is gonna mix at level 6 on my mixer. So that's a good, nice medium speed. So we'll see what it does. So I mixed it for 5 minutes, and while I didn't show you guys, I do want to show you now that when I push it down the bowl, it does come away from the bowl easily. It's not in a round ball like traditional rolls or bread dough would be, but it does come away from the sides. It is pretty smooth, and if I remember correctly from the bread recipe, once I put it out on the board, it was wonderful. So it is a little sticky, but not too bad. So I don't want to add any more flour to this per Kat's instructions. So let's get this transferred over to the board and see how it does. All right, so I've got my board down. I use this silicone mat a lot for gluten-free baking because it does help with the sticking and with me having to clean the counter quite as much. I'm gonna take some millet flour and lightly dust the board because we're gonna need it for 2 reasons. 1, it's gonna help it from sticking still, but 2, ciabatta rolls tend to have a floury outside to them because of how they're made. So that's gonna help with that as well. A couple other things I'm using. I'm gonna bake mine on a pizza stone. I love this for things like this because it really does help give those rolls or a loaf of bread a great crust, or your pizza as well. So I've been using this a lot more recently. They're not super expensive. So I'll link below to some options. I'm also gonna use a pizza screen because that is gonna help me transfer these rolls to the stone. And I'm gonna put them on parchment paper. So I will put the rolls on the parchment paper on the screen, and then that will be in the oven ready for me hot when I need it. Millet flour's on the board. Let's get our dough down. Now it says to knead it into a ball. So I've lightly floured my hands. Let's make it into a ball. And while it didn't knead into a ball for the mix, it is doing it now. Just took a minute. Now that I've worked it into a ball, I'm just gonna move it to the side because I'm going to cover this heavily with that gluten-free millet flour, because that's what's going to give us our ciabatta style roll look. So let's move this over. Let me get this refloured. All right, heavily floured. We're aiming for a rectangle, so let's start that process off now. Ciabatta rolls tend to have a square shape to them. I've got my rolling pin. One thing that this psyllium husk allows is you can actually roll some dough a little bit. So I'm gonna roll it out to about 10 inches by 8.5. I think I'm pretty much spot on. It looks pretty good as a square too. So now what we need to do is cut it into rolls. So Kat cuts her ciabatta rolls into 6. So I'm gonna go down the middle. And then try to do it in thirds, which I'm not always great at. So there's gonna be some good sized rolls. So if you want them smaller, I don't see why you can't do that. We did it in 6. They don't have to be exact, but look how easily they pick up. So now you wanna put it floured side up onto your parchment paper. So I've left myself an edge so I don't throw any on the floor. So let's finish those. Look at those. They all cut great. They're a good size if you want it on a sandwich. So I'm hoping they puff up like they're supposed to. Now we need to let them rise. So I turned my oven on to the lowest setting for about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes, which was 170 degrees. And then I turned it off before it preheated. It's cooled down a little bit now, but that's gonna give me a nice draft-free, warm place for the yeast to do its job. So now I need to get it in there to proof. So I do need to cover these lightly with plastic wrap, so let's do that. Okay, I've got them covered. It's gonna keep them from drying out. So I'm gonna proof these for about 40 minutes and then I'll pull them out of the oven. And at that point, I'll show you guys how to set up the oven so you guys can get some great results with these rolls, and we'll go over temperatures of baking. So these ciabatta rolls are probably actually ready to go in the oven, but I need to preheat it. So this is how the oven is set up. In the bottom portion of the oven, the lowest rack, I have a cast iron pan because we're gonna throw some ice cubes in here at the start of the baking process to provide steam, and that's gonna help make those rolls nice and crusty. Above it, I have my pizza stone. If you don't have a pizza stone, she says you can use a heavy duty cookie sheet that's big enough to hold your rolls upside down here. I do have a pizza stone. I love using this, so I do highly recommend getting one if you do enough baking where it will be advantageous for you. So look at me using the big words. All right, let's get this closed. I'm gonna preheat the oven to 475 degrees. You want a good preheat, so about 20 minutes or so. Probably I should have taken those rolls out a little sooner, but I think 20 minutes will be fine. Kat suggests preheating it for up to 45 minutes. The oven is almost preheated. So while it finishes, let's go over the baking steps for this recipe. So then I can just show you guys what they look like going into the oven, and then we can skip ahead to the end and give them a taste. So for the baking process, we are starting at 475 degrees. When I open that oven door, I'm gonna put those rolls on the baking stone along with the parchment paper, of course. I'm going to throw the ice cubes in the cast iron pan down below. You don't want to use glass because we don't want to risk breaking a glass casserole dish. But I'm going to put those ice cubes in there, shut the door, and I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes. During that 10 minutes, that steam created in the oven is going to help give a good crust on those rolls. The other thing I'm going to do after I shut that oven, I'm going to drop the oven temperature down to 425 degrees. After the 10 minutes, I'm going to open up the oven. I'm going to take out the pan just in case there's any other water left over in that pan because the steaming process is done. I'm gonna close the oven back up and I'm gonna bake the rolls for an additional 15 minutes until they are a deep golden brown. Once they come out of the oven, we're gonna cool them on a wire rack until they're completely cool. Kat says that if you cut into them too soon, they can be sticky. So that tells us that we are gonna need some carryover baking time to finish off those rolls. Guys, let me show you what they look like as they go into the oven. Then we're gonna give them a taste once they cool. So here's one of the finished ciabatta rolls. It's kind of a triangle. I'm okay with that. It's actually the smallest of the rolls. I definitely think we could have gone a little smaller, maybe gotten 8 out of this because this one is huge, but that's really good for a sandwich, guys. They smell really good, smell like bread. They've got some interior softness, I can tell already. Crusty on the outside, nice and golden all over. So let me cut into this. I don't know if I'm gonna try it with butter or not yet, but I'm gonna cut into it across because if you were using it as a sandwich, that's what you would do. Let's move you guys down to the counter so you can see me cut into it. Look at that. Nice pockets in there. Let's give it a taste. Okay, so I've cut it down smaller, but look at that crumb. You want to let these cool completely to make sure they can bake completely, because one of the things that Kat said again is that they can get a little sticky when they first come out of the oven, so let them cool completely so they're not. They honestly shouldn't take that long to cool. They're not like a thick loaf of bread, so half hour to an hour. You know, an hour would be better. Let's see what it tastes like. Good texture. Crisp on the outside, chewy on the inside. That is a good roll. I don't think it needs butter. I think I'm gonna put butter on it anyway though. Butter on this piece. These rolls are fantastic. They would make a great sandwich. Good for dinner, to have with some soup. Good to cut them in half and make some kind of sandwich out of it, especially if you keep them with the 6 count. Guys, nothing bad to say about this recipe. Again, I did make her gluten-free white bread recently, which another amazing recipe. I think Kat has some really good stuff over at her website, so definitely check them out. Before we go, let's go over how to store these. Kat says you can store them for 3 to 4 days at room temperature as long as they are in an airtight container. She does recommend using them on the first day, of course, because that's when they're the freshest. After day 1, you're going to want to reheat these in a 350-degree oven for 6 to 8 minutes, or even pop them in your toaster oven for a few minutes. In our house, if they don't get eaten on day 1, we usually do freeze them unless we know Tara's going to have one the very next day. I will say with Kat's bread that I made, it did well the next day, but then we did freeze it. If you're going to freeze these, we like to wrap them individually in plastic wrap and then put them in a Ziploc freezer bag. That way there, we can just pop one out when Tara wants one. Or if I don't have any regular bread in the house or anything, I will pop one out for myself as well. But Tara tends to get the gluten-free goodies like this because I can eat the regular stuff. Guys, nothing bad to say about this recipe. Another good one from Kat. I really appreciate that she comes out with these great recipes. That's all I have for today. So be sure to subscribe, like this video, and leave your comments below. And I've got some bread to finish off, so I hope to see you in the next video.